Welcome to this webinar. I'm Peter Mellalieu, and I'm pleased to introduce you to our webinar on peer assessment and peer feedback in group assignments. I'm an academic. I've been an academic for 30 years, and I've taught a variety of subjects from strategy, sustainability, innovation, and so forth. But I've often used group projects and struggled with some of the pains of dysfunctional teams. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I began to seriously address the issue of peer assessment and peer feedbacks and getting a fair grade for students working in teams, with a particular view to overcoming some of the dysfunctional nature of some teams and rewarding those people that had contributed more strongly to the output of those teams. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Patrick Dodd. Patrick Dodd is a more recent member of the academic community. He's been teaching for about 5 or 6 years now. I'd like to ask Patrick, what got you into using groups and teams in your work? What are some of the problems you've addressed? And how have you introduced peer feedback, peer assessment in your teaching?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. So as Peter mentioned, I started teaching about 6 years ago at Unitec, which is where Peter and I met. Unitec is the largest polytech in New Zealand and focuses really on applied learning. So when I started, interesting, Peter, I remember going through the new staff induction or the new teacher induction and being introduced to team-based learning as a pedagogical tool, and really became interested in that and adapted a couple of classes to fit that team-based learning model. And one of the things that's inherent in team-based learning is peer assessment, and it's an activity that's a summit, can be a summative assessment, typically at the end of the semester. So it was around team-based learning, peer assessment, and then having, because we are applied learning at Unitec, a lot of group projects, and understanding that group projects can go really well, or they can go off the rails fairly quickly, and identifying those contributing factors that can knock the team off course has been something that I think you and I have been iterating on for a number of years now, and I think we're finally pulling it all together and have identified all of the best practices, which we'll present today on that.
Thanks, Patrick. So I think what we should do now is just go straight into our presentation. You've got a formal presentation, so let's hear it about group assessment, group feedback.
So these are the learning outcomes that we endeavor to cover off today. As you can see, some of these you could go quite deep into and really spend quite a bit of time. Unfortunately, we have an hour today and won't be able to do that. But as we go along, please feel free to ask questions, raise your hand in the webinar, etc. And if there's something you'd like me to address further, I'd be more than happy to, or Pete can as well. So let's just jump right into the benefits of group assignments. There are a couple of areas that I'd like to highlight. From a teacher's perspective, group projects are amazing. They give you the ability to assign a really meaty project at or near the end of the semester that ties all of those learnings that you've learned prior to that group assessment in the semester, as well as those additional learnings at the end of the semester, into one big activity. This is an activity which is necessarily bigger than any one student to do, so you can't have them as individual projects, but rather they are a big group project. Of course, there's the reduced marking burden, which is always nice at the end of the semester, but certainly not as important as the freedom to assign a bigger project. From a student's point of view, when group projects go really well, and we're calling this process learning, students really develop a skill set of soft skills around leadership, collaboration, and teamwork, which is really impressive and important, as we'll see later on. We'll go right now to the drawbacks of group assignments, and I wanted to highlight a couple of areas there. From a student's perspective, team dynamics can really cause group assignments to go bad. And that is typically you'll have one or two students that are free riders or social loafers that rely on the other team members to do the majority of the work. Then you can have dominators, blockers, aggressors, etc., which really upset the team dynamics, making group work really unpleasant for students. And if you were to do this is really funny, if you do an advanced search on Twitter at or near the end of the semester for group projects, you'll see just how unhappy some students can be with group projects. From a teacher's point of view, the drawbacks really are around the verification of individual achievement of required learning outcomes. And this is hard to do, especially if you give everybody the same mark for a piece of work that's been completed. It's hard to say, which students did the most work or which students accomplished the most, etc. And it's very rare in a team group or a team dynamic where everybody performs equally. So if they don't perform equally, they shouldn't be, measured again, giving the same achievement of required learning outcomes. And of course, this leads into allocating fair marks. So the ability to allocate marks based on an individual's contribution really is key. But as Peter and I have found, it's hard to do and quite time-consuming if you don't have the right tools for you available to you. Each year, the National Association of Colleges and Employers conduct a survey. And they survey businesses, and they ask them a lot of questions, one of which is to identify those competencies that are really important, that they're looking for in recent graduates. And in 2018, these are the competencies that were highlighted. And you can see the importance or the weighted average on the right. Peter and I believe that those that are highlighted in green is that process learning. Those are the soft skills that are really developed, honed, and forged in group learning, if done well. So the teamwork, the professionalism, the oral and written communications, etc., those all really get developed well in group learning. Those that we have highlighted in orange also get developed in group learning, which are not necessarily tied to group learning. So how are the benefits realized? Well, we've identified 3 key areas, and all of these really fall under the umbrella of holding students accountable. Holding students accountable in the assessment design, holding students accountable in the peer assessment, and in peer feedback. And we'll get into each one of those points now. So group project design, I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about project design because I think teaching and learning departments at the respective universities or tertiary institutions do a really good job of guiding you through that. I would like to just say that it's really important to avoid that divide and conquer assignment design, one that students can just at the outset to divide it up, each doing their own individual part of the project, and then coming together and pasting it in a report format, perhaps. That really is not a group project. It's just a bunch of individuals working on their individual pieces that then get conglomerated into a group project. And yeah, that's just it's not conducive to good learning. The next part is really about holding students accountable. And that is introducing them to the policies that would do that. Those can be institutional policies, departmental policies, etc. Contracts in which students are able to co-create their contract so that everybody understands what the consequences are, what the desired behavior is, and what the consequences are for not performing to that level of standard. Now you can see that around policies, contracts, rules, and responsibilities, these are linked, and we'll send out the presentation slides, and you can click on those, and those link to specific templates that you could use. Project plans are also also there that are really important and quite often overlooked. Project management is a skill that's also learned, and compelling students to really outline all of the tasks that need to be done, when those tasks need to be done, and by who is really important, so that at the outset they understand who's doing what and have that common understanding. I'd also like to talk to you about the collaborative tools. Now, I use Google Docs for everything, so each team gets their own Google Doc to work on, for which I'm the owner. And Google Doc really provides some transparency, so that if you look at the revision history of a Google Doc, you can see who's done what, who's typed what, when they've done it, so that if there's any controversy at the end where a student says, I've done this, and another student said, no, they didn't, you can easily check that in a Google Doc. Slack is a corporate communications tool, which I'm starting to use in all of my classes, and it's fantastic. Quite often in a group project, a team will set up a Facebook group and then not invite you to participate. Whereas if you compel them to use Slack, or require them to use Slack for all of their team communications, then you as a teacher, one, they can ask you questions in the group Slack channel. You can follow along with the conversations that are going on to make sure that those types of conversations are really conducive to getting the project done, and that there's no harmful or hateful, destructive speech that can get teams off track. And then at the end, bringing it together with a reflective journal and essay, clearly an individual piece of this is really, I think, good practice. So raising learning outcome through peer feedback, it really is about, I think, determining a fair grade for each team member based on their contribution to the overall project. And this is the way that you can definitively say, using peer feedback, peer assessment, that a student has accomplished to a level of a standard those learning outcomes that were outlined as part of the coursework.
Can I just come in there, Patrick, and just
go right ahead.
That often these what we call process learning capabilities, these employer competencies that they seek, these are often presented in the graduate profile or the program profile, but not necessarily translated into specific learning outcomes for the course. So where do these things get developed and where do they get measured? Well, it is through the peer assessment and the peer feedback that these process learning capabilities are developed and realized, and you get some measure of their achievement. Over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding to that, Peter, because that really is important. So the approaches for conducting peer assessment. Now, these are things that Peter and I started doing, 6 years ago, and all of these things really can be quite time intensive for a teacher to do, which is, if you wanted to, especially with team-based learning, one of those is simply handing out a table and asking students then to divide up 100 points amongst their team members, not giving themselves any points, and using that as a quantitative way to measure contribution to task. But it's hard. It's recording all of these into a spreadsheet and then trying to automate that. That really is a hard piece of work. And that's where Peter and I have, I think, over the past 6 years, really developed something that's quite special that automates most, if not all, of these things for you. So we've used quantitative surveys, qualitative surveys, bringing them all together, and the culmination of this really is the PeerAssess Pro tool. Right, jumping into best practice for peer assessment and peer feedback. I'd like to just focus on the ideal. Now, peer assessment requires an initial briefing. And during that initial briefing, getting the students to understand that their individual grades are going to be based on the teamwork, the overall team score, plus a score that's generated by their peer assessment. So that understanding is that it's quite possible for a team to get, say, a high A on their overall work, but for a social loafer who did very little to actually fail the assignment. So when students understand that, holding them accountable really gets them, that gets them off on the right foot, so to speak. And that can be done in that initial briefing. So with Peer Assess Pro, we say, here are the 10 criteria that are going to be used, the 10 questions, 5 of which are going to be addressing contribution to task, and 5 questions around leadership. And even having students develop a rubric for what is the best case scenario for each one of those versus what does average look like is a really good way to get students to understand what's going to be required of them. The next point is the formative assessment halfway through. So with Peer Assess Pro, it's really easy to conduct a formative peer assessment session halfway through a project. This allows you as a teacher to see how things are going, to identify teams that are having problems, or to identify individual students that are not contributing, and to get everything hopefully back on track where you have half the project left in order to get things going again. So it is possible for a student at the halfway point to not be performing up to the standards that the rest of the group has, but for them to, once they understand that, to pull up their socks and to pull it out and to actually get a decent grade at the end. So that formative assessment halfway through is really important. And then following that at the end of the project with a summative peer assessment, where they actually get a team result, a peer assess score, and then a personal result from that. So if we jump into peer feedback, typically this is done at the same time, this initial briefing, as the peer assessment, but it's really important to break them apart because the feedback and the assessment are 2 different activities and they require 2 different skill sets. The peer feedback, I think Pete would agree with this, is probably we didn't anticipate it to be such a powerful tool. Powerful in the way that it can really either have a positive outcome or be absolutely devastating for a student if they're not prepared for it. So it's extremely important that you prepare students for peer feedback. Now on the Peer Assess Pro website, we've got some student resources or some resources available that teachers can use to introduce peer feedback. There's a couple of videos that we like to show which really outline what good feedback looks like and the importance of feedback, how to give feedback, and as importantly, how to receive feedback. Because it's that, we as humans, we're not born with the ability to effectively give and receive feedback. It's something that's learned, and the only way that you learn it is to go through the process. So making sure that you've introduced students to peer feedback is really, really important. And again, so that you go through that initial briefing, that formative peer feedback report, that ties in with the peer assessment halfway through, where they actually get the quantitative and qualitative feedback in which they can use to have these courageous conversations. And it's really important for teachers to be able to structure those conversations as well. Say, okay, team member X, do you have anything that you'd like to ask about the feedback that you've received? And then it gives them a chance to say, hey, it says here that I didn't do very well on as a leader or in the attendance, and I'd like some clarification around that. And then for other students to go in and explain why they gave the comments that they did. And then again, that leads into the summative part of the peer assessment and peer feedback at the end of the project. That then determines the individual grade, but it also, the peer feedback at the end is really the fodder for good reflection so that they can reflect on the feedback that they've received reflect on the project in a journal or et cetera. So that can be an individual part of a group project that ties everything together, that really solidifies that learning. Right. Next, we're going to get into the Peer Assess Pro section of the presentation. Better feedback, better teams, and that's what we're all about.
We produced an app that improves team effectiveness through providing structured feedback. There's in-depth reporting for both the teacher and the student. Individual grades are determined, and it's explained clearly how those are created. And finally, the whole process saves time for the teacher. We've addressed the pains in 3 areas: administration of the survey, the diagnosis of dysfunctional teams and individuals, and the overall support for managing the team and peer assessment process. I'm going to concentrate on the peer assessment survey, the calculation of the results from the peer assessment survey. We'll look at the personalised feedback reports that students receive. And finally, we'll look at the gradebook, which the teacher gets once the whole process is done. I should also mention that a key component of the administration is communications and notifications, which go to both the students about where and how to complete the survey, and to the teacher about what to do and when to do it. So we're coming now to a demonstration of the Peer Assess application. We're going to do it like we see on TV and those cooking programs. We're going to mix the ingredients to make a cake, and then we're going to look at a cake that's already been baked and we're just about to take it out of the oven. So first of all, we're going to launch a new peer assessment survey by first creating what's called a team set CSV, comma-separated file. Then we're going to go to something called the Zorro dashboard, which is where the Peer Assess Pro app lives, and launch with that team set of teams. Then we're going to wait for the cake to bake. Then we'll come back and look at the Zorro dashboard again to overview the survey of the progress of the survey that we've already got running and set up. We'll enter the team results, choose a personal result method, review and download the gradebook, and then we are a happy teacher with happy students. So we start the process with what's called a team set. A team set is a list of all the students in your class with their IDs and names, their emails, and the teams into which the students have been organized. I've created this in Google Sheets, but you can create it in Excel or however you want to create your CSV. We'll download now the CSV. Here it is down the bottom. And we are now going to Zorro. So Zorro is our partner with Peer Assess Pro. Zorro is an educational software provider, and they've embedded the peer assessment component as part of their system. So we're going to launch the peer assessment now, and we're going to call this one Ornithology 103 Formative. And here we see the team set. I'm going to import that file, which is in my downloads right there, right now. Here we go. And the first thing we see is a display of all the teams, and we just take a quick glance to check that we are seeing what we expect to see. Down the bottom, we import, and we'll set a time to start right now and a due date. The due date is an advisory date to the student to let them know when they should complete the peer assessment by. I run a pretty tight schedule of peer assessments, typically 2 a term, so I usually give my students about 3 to 5 days to complete. So let's just choose a date now, which is about 3 days from now, which is the Friday the 12th, and we'll set it there for 11 o'clock. So we've got a start date, a due date, and we're creating the activity. What's happening now is a survey is being produced, which is being launched to every team, and an advisory email is being sent to each student so they know where to go and when they need to complete that survey by. They will receive an email which contains what's called an activity URL. And in fact, here is the link right here. And here's our activity, Ornithology 103 Formative, the title I just gave it. And we sign in with our student ID. And here I am, Alberto Underwood. And then I would proceed to complete the survey. It asks us to check that we're in the right team and that everybody is the correct team member. And then we proceed through. But we'll come back to this later on. So now we've got to wait for this cake to build. At the moment, we've got 30 students that have yet to complete the survey. Now, we can actually send them an email, but we don't need to. They've already received the email that's reminding them they should complete the survey. I'm going to go back now to the home of Peer Assess Pro, and I'm going to find a cake that's already been cooking. This is Ornithologists 101. So here we find that we've still got 10 students that haven't taken part in the survey. So I'm sending them some reminder emails. Emails sent. But what I want to do is to see what the progress of the class would be if I put in the team results right now. So I'm going to enter the team results. We've actually got some here. So I'm entering the team results, 30, 60, 75, and so on. I submit the team results. We come back to the dashboard here. And we're going to choose a method for how we will calculate the personal result. If it's the final results, we'll typically choose one of these final methods here, the normalized personal result. Save. We see a distribution chart for the results across the whole class. And if we want to look at our star performers, we look at this bucket, the 90 to 100 bucket over here. And here are our top rated students in the Grey Warblers team. We can see the spread of marks within each team. We'll come back to this later on. And let's now just produce our statistics for the class. So we'll download the report, our gradebook. We've got a full report, which we can also produce. And we've got a whole lot of qualitative reports, which we'll download as well, and the feedback that the teacher has produced. These are supplementary reports. Now I'm going to just create a new spreadsheet, and I'm going to import those reports so we can look at them. They are in my download folders: the teachers, the qualitative, and the class statistics. So there we are. We have our gradebook with our student ID, names, the team result, and the individual result. It's as quick and as easy as that. What have I missed, Patrick? Anything else I should say at this stage?
No, I think it's pretty good. I think it's important just to highlight that the team scores are quite different than the individual scores, and that's the nice thing about using peer assessment to suss out that individual score.
Right. So, for example, in Team Grey Warblers, we've got a big spread of marks. Let's just have a look at the Team Grey Warblers and understand what's going on here. So here's Grey Warblers. The team result was 75. But we see that we've got a range of marks ranging from 100 for 2 students, 66, and 0 for 1 student. The average of these marks here will in fact be 75. We've given some these high marks based on their high peer assessed score, and these people get marks below 75 based on their low peer assessed score. So why is Jocelyn getting this 0? This suggests this is part of this discussion about diagnosis of dysfunctional teams or dysfunctional individuals. So we see that she's been rated 0, but at any point in Peer Assess Pro, we can click on the name of the student and we can see what people, we have this comprehensive report, and we can see that she is rated 0. But the more important stuff is these comments here that people are making. Mariah, she didn't show up to the meetings, didn't do the work. We only had 1 meeting with Jocelyn. She attended only our first meeting. She chose a task, but didn't submit anything at the end. As you say, Patrick, in class, we shouldn't give credit to someone who didn't contribute to the team.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. Also, just really quick before you get out, well, if you go back to that, it's important that to show that what you were looking at was what the teachers view, and what the student sees is anonymous.
Yes.
So that feedback, they get the feedback, they just don't know who said what.
Correct. So in this teacher's dashboard, we can see what the teacher would see for this interrogation, but we can also see exactly what the student will see on their dashboard. So they'll see a similar result, 0, but down here in these reports, for example, we'll see they're anonymized. Number 1, number 2, number 3. They don't know who said what about it. Now, at this stage, we should also say the students cannot see anything. The results at this stage have not been published. So the student is merely seeing this report. The results aren't ready yet. Your result will be available when the facilitator, that's me, the teacher, reviews and publishes the reports. So this allows the teacher to do some quality assurance of the results before they are transmitted, populated to the student's view. So we showed you how to launch a new peer assessment survey. we showed you the dashboard for a survey that was already in progress, and we produced the gradebook from the team results and the peer assessed scores. Now, we're still waiting for a few more results to come through from the students, and we'll have a look at those in a minute. But how would we get started? So we go through to Peer Assess Pro. Here's our website, and there's a bright green button up here, Get Started. So there is a 12-month free trial for using Peer Assess Pro, and that begins when you register, and the registration process is here. We suggest you download our Quick Start Guide, and then look at some of the sections to help you prepare for introducing peer assessment, and then you register for the 12-month free trial. Then the next job you'll do is create a CSV file, a comma-separated variable file, which comprises your team set of your class list, into which you have sorted your class into their teams. Then later on you'll upload this to the peer assessment, which we showed you before. So that's how you get started. Follow that link there and get your 12-month free trial. I want to talk about perhaps some of the questions that you have, one of which is what goes on with the peer assessment survey. There are the peer assessment ratings. There are some qualitative questions we ask. Then there is the way in which the peer assessed score is calculated from the ratings. And then finally, how the personal result is determined. The survey asks 10 quantitative questions, which measure contribution to team output, leadership, and team processes. There's a self-assessment. The student also rates themselves. And there's a final question on recommendation. Would you recommend this student, this team member, to another team, to a friend, or an employer? Kind of net promoter type question. We have 3 qualitative questions, which ultimately focus on gaining developmental feedback. What do you advise this student should do in order to improve the quality of their contribution to this team or future teams? The peer assessed score is calculated from the assessment ratings. It's more or less adding up all the ratings and adding a few correction factors to ensure that there's a score between 0 and 100. The self-assessment is excluded from the calculation of the peer assessed score. The personal result, summative at the end of the term, is typically the team result times some function of the peer assessed score. As you saw with the NPR method, the normalized personal result method, the team result gets boosted above or below the team result for the individual team members. There are 3 or 4 other methods that you can use. Typically for formative assessment, when you haven't marked your team results, you will use either the raw peer assessed score or the peer assessed score index, where the best member in each team gets a score of 100. So we're back here in the Zorro Peer Assess Pro dashboard, and let's go back to our survey, which is still running. And this is the link, the activity. And we're back with Alberto, who is finishing his survey. So here's our Likert scale and the question here: how likely is it you would recommend this team member to a friend, colleague, or employer? Alberto, I am rather good, neutral, very likely, etc. And then we've got 5 questions dealing with contribution to task accomplishment. Did they contribute to getting the job done? Showing initiative by doing research and analysis. Prepares for and attends meetings.
Peter, if I can just jump in while you're clicking.
Yeah.
This is, as you can see here, it's really good at that initial briefing that you show them what questions are going to be there, and then to have them develop a rubric so that they understand, for example, reliably fills assigned tasks, work is professional quality. What does average look like, and what does outstanding look like? That way that they're, if they all buy in and can complete this rubric, that there's a shared understanding of what each one of those means, so that they don't give each other 5s all the way across for everything.
So here we are, our first batch of questions, and which were contribution to task accomplishment. Now we ask the respondent to provide specific examples of productive or ineffective behavior related to the ratings that they gave for contribution to task accomplishment. And this is where there are several rubrics that you can introduce to your students to give them some ideas of the words that might be used. So again, these qualitative answers are helpful to help the student understand what they've done right or wrong.
And we have that under the resources on the PeerAssess Pro website, an FAQ of what good feedback looks like.
But wait, there's more. We've shown you how you can do the basic job of conducting the survey and calculating the personal results and create your gradebook. But 2 other important parts of the peer assessment system are diagnosis, identifying the dysfunctional teams and individuals that might be operating in your class, looking at some of the key strengths and weaknesses of the class in terms of those 10 process learning attributes that we described earlier: collaboration, contribution, and so forth, and other exploratory data analysis. So we're back with our ornithologists here. So the first part of diagnosis is the active warnings. We've seen that some students have rated their team members quite differently than other team members. The second thing is we can, when we're looking at the results for the class as a whole, we can quickly highlight the high performers and the low performers. So if we want to look down here, we've got the low performers, Cameron and Jocelyn. We looked at Jocelyn before. Again, we saw from this spread of results within team, we saw this team, Grey Warblers, had a bit of a dysfunction, that someone was a spectacular underperformer. And so we were able to find out who that low performer was. And as we saw before, we can look at her individual report and see what the comments were supporting this low rating. In the advanced statistics, we find here, for example, that the class rates strongly in terms of attendance on average. People do turn up, but at the other end of the spectrum, we've got that people are generally rating the rest of the class relatively low in terms of the attribute of chairmanship, which was organizing meetings, keeping the meeting focused, things like that. So this becomes a point that you can discuss with the class to look at how to better manage and organize meetings. Another particularly advanced feature is what we call IRSA, the Index of Realistic Self-Assessment. What we'd like to see is that people rate themselves with the same score as what the rest of their team rates them. And that's what these green dots here are on the line from 50-50 down to 100-100. So if a person rates themselves low and the rest of their team rates themselves low, then they are realistic in their understanding. If they are somebody who rates themselves high, but in fact is rated very low by the team, then they are regarded as unrealistic in their assessment. And so we have a table over here that we can find the people who are particularly unrealistic in their expectations of what their team thinks. These people are rating themselves very high. Their team members are rating themselves low. So this is a way of identifying those students who unrealistically rate themselves rather highly, and it's likely that you might be facing a conversation or some tears with these students when they come to receive their progress results or their final results. Patrick, is there anything you want to add on the IRSA analysis at this point?
No, I think just reinforcing what you said, Peter, though, that those that have the unrealistic that have an unrealistic self-assessment are those that are going to be the most upset when they actually receive the feedback. So pulling them aside before class, or attending to them during class, really is important, because this is where the waterworks happens.
Yeah. In fact, we saw the example before where Cameron was rated very low by her team, and here she is. She thought, well, yeah, I didn't think I did that bad, but still her team says, no, you did really poorly. At the other end of the spectrum are people that rate themselves quite low. Mohammed here has rated themselves low, 30. June has rated herself quite low, but her team members rate herself quite high. So these are people who are underconfident, and so it's worth just giving them a bit of a boost. Hey, look, you can be more confident in what you are doing. Don't hold back. People are really valuing the contributions that you are making. And again, let's at any point you can go in and see the detailed assessment. So here we see orange here, we see how he's rating himself relatively low on all the 10 attributes from the survey, and then the marks from the others are further out. He's rating himself particularly weak, and that's interesting, in terms of attendance and chairmanship, but the others are rating themselves quite strongly. Let's look at some of the qualitative feedback. Mohammed was able to work with the team and handle conflict well. It would have been great, however, if he was more participative in the group outside of class as well. So an important part of Peer Assess Pro is the development feedback. The advice that the student should make going forward with the team. And this is why it's so efficient, so effective to do Peer Assess Pro. You can do it twice a term. I regularly do it twice a term, once at about week 3, week 4, while the team is still in the early stages of forming and storming. This helps them understand what the peer assessment process is going to be and what the feedback is going to be, and it helps them make early mid-course corrections on what they need to do. So, make a point in attending all meetings. We saw that in the chart. Conduct thorough research and help other team members improve so that the overall report is high quality. So that's what we've got there. That's pretty well that for some of the advanced diagnosis features of Peer Assess Pro.
Right, let's go on. I think we're just wrapping things up now with a summary and conclusion. Best practice. Session, and this is, we've broken this down into a 10-week session. Quite often, my group projects don't go 10 weeks. They typically go probably 4 to 6 weeks. But in any event, you can see how we've broken this down, and you can adjust accordingly. That first meeting, the course introduction, getting the teams assigned, introduced, the team building, icebreakers, etc. Very important. But again, that briefing in the session 2 for peer assessments and peer feedback really is crucial. That gets things started in the right direction. The formative peer assessment, Peter just showed you how quickly you can do that using Peer Assess Pro. Having that midway, and again, it's a formative assessment, really lets the students know where they sit. Extremely important. Wrapping things up around week 8, where the team activity concludes, you do the summative peer assessment, you have a session where they come back and have those courageous conversations in week 9, and then week 10 at the end is having that critical reflective essay, really based on the peer feedback that they received, their peer assessments, potentially how the course went, how the group project went, etc. That both Peter and I are really big proponents of that reflective essay at the end. This is an interesting slide in that this shows pretty well in terms of a histogram diagram there. The difference between a well-prepared class and one that has not been prepared well. On the left is the well-prepared, and you see that it's a fairly good bell-shaped curve there, where the scores, you have a kind of a fat middle here, and then a few students on each end forming the bell-shaped curve. And that just lets you know that peer assessment, that students have understand exactly what they're assessing, because not everybody is the same, and that's exactly what's illustrated there. On the right, the Lake Wobegon effect, where everybody believes themselves to be higher than average, is demonstrated. And that is typically where the students are trying to game the system, where they'll just say, well, everybody did reasonably well. I'm going to give everybody 4s or 5s. Also, a good thing to note here that we have a warning around that shows when a student or a team of students have a very narrow range of scores that have been given. And you can ask them really quickly and easily with an email that we've got set up to redo those scores. Pete, did you have anything to say about this slide?
Just to point out that both these slides are from real peer assessment surveys that have gone. The one on the right, as you see, was for a very large class of 850 students, about 150 teams. So that's just a side on now. Peer Assess Pro is highly scalable to very large classes. These are real results.
Yeah. Right. To wrap everything up, make sure that your group projects are really properly designed and that you take a position of proactive management. You need to use peer assessment and peer feedback to hold students accountable in order to realize the full benefits of the group project itself. There's some tools that are available, Peer Assess Pro, and we've got some other policies and tools around contracts and team rules, etc., on the website, and following up with the PeerAssess Pro platform, really taking all of those things that Peter and I have been working on in terms of those processes that make group projects excellent and automating them into one solid platform that's both reliable and valid in terms of being able to give students an individual grade based on a team score. And we're ready for any questions if you have them. Thank you very much. We really appreciated your time and attention. Here are our emails. Please feel free to email us if you have any questions, comments, concerns, etc. And we look forward to having you join us on the platform and having really good group projects for the coming semesters. Don't forget, we have a lot of resources available on the PeerAssess Pro website. You can sign up now for a 12-month free trial. That is kind of a limited offer there. We're going to be scaling that back shortly, so get in now while you can. Any chance, anything that you need to have more clarification around, Peter and I are always available. We'll send out a copy of the webinar with the slides, our email addresses, and yeah, we're ready to help.
Great, and thanks very much, Patrick, and thanks very much to the audience that have participated in our webinars to date.